Welcome, everybody. It's Donald Davidoff, co-founder and CEO of Real Estate Business Analytics, here for another episode of The People Behind the Performance, where I sit down with key leaders and disruptors in our industry to dive into what's really driving the real estate industry's success, the role data plays in it all, and to tell the stories of the people behind it. Today's guest, Lynn Musil, has an extensive professional background holding diverse roles across various industries, commencing his career in 1996 as an account executive at Center Partners. He progressed through Factual Data, First Advantage Safe Rent, which is where I met him, Creative Solutions, CoreLogic Safe Rent, and Onsite.com. This journey led him to the founding of PayReady in 2016, a cloud-based debt management platform tailored to enhance collection processes. His educational qualifications include a Master's of Science in Organizational Leadership from Colorado State University and a Bachelor of Science in Social Science, also from Colorado State. Welcome, Lynn.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. So it's kind of an interesting transition state going on in the macro economy and certainly in multifamily these days. So as you think about the state of the industry today, you know, what's on your mind? And hopefully it doesn't change too much between now and when we publish this, because it's volatile, I think.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely a lot. There's been a lot happening. You know, you're coming out of the pandemic, finding the new normal with everything, and then, the buzzword of the day, AI. So there's a lot of new participants in the space, and so things are evolving rather quickly. So to me, it's a really exciting time. I feel really fortunate to have come through things the way that we did. In a lot of ways, we were a beneficiary of the pandemic, in that a lot of more attention got paid to compliance around how debt management is handled, how you're able to track and control processes around those things. And so now there's a bit of a race to, the convergence of AI solutions and centralized leasing, and what do you do with all the data that you've accumulated and those kinds of things. So I think it's a really exciting time.
Yeah, I'm curious you mentioned AI a couple times. I mean, there's so much hype about AI. In fact, I just coming back from OpTech less than a month ago, what I found interesting was the ratio of talk about AI to the number of actual examples, at least generative AI, right? I sort of want to separate predictive AI, generative AI, and even in generative AI, right? There's the lease hawks and lease AIs and the sort of leasing stuff that's been around for a while now. I think people are pretty used to that and figuring out how to do that. But in terms of the amount of talk around generative AI, against what I saw was a dearth of actual real world examples. So I sort of still feeling, to me, it still feels like we haven't gotten to Gartner's peak of inflated expectations on the hype cycle. I'm curious what you think.
I agree completely. It's a fun buzzword that everyone's throwing around. But when you really dig into it and ask the second, third questions, what's real today feels a lot more mostly like decision tree sort of chatbot type ideas and things like that, not actual generative AI. So and even with that, whatever tools you are building, what data sets do you really have access to? What's missing from those? What does the AI even have an opportunity to talk to and pull from? So I think a lot of that'll get sorted out, I guess, over time. Where my mind is with it is, we've invested pretty heavily in that area on the development side. We've got 7 years worth of deep move-out related data, very specific move-out related data that we're starting to comb through. And then from our standpoint, also the resident interaction piece. We've got automated solutions and voice solutions and text and email and that sort of thing. And we're building and testing hybrid solutions, because even with that, when you have resident interaction, there still needs to be escalation points and off ramps to human behavior that feel natural. So where this all meets with the idea of centralized leasing and the communication part of things, I think is going to be really interesting. We're in an interesting position on this whole concept where when you talk about the idea of centralized leasing, there's a lot of focus on the onboarding of residents and capturing of residents and that sort of thing. When you talk about collections or move out related things and debt management, it's a natural fit for it to be off ramped from the leasing
Yeah.
staff. They don't want to deal with it anyway.
Yeah.
And in some cases, those functions are already centralized in accounts receivable teams and things like that. So
Yeah.
the tool sets that we've been able to build around those things, it's kind of like I joke that we were kind of centralized leasing before it was cool.
Yeah.
And so we're just continuing to build that out and build the tools around it. And I guess to jump back to the AI piece is, where do we find the happy marriage between the intersection of those communication tools and the data analysis, and what do you do with those things, as long as there is that off ramp ability to escalate
Yeah.
dispute handling. It gets gets a little more complicated than it sounds on the surface.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we just released a point of view paper on AI, obviously more from a what does it mean for data analytics. So anybody listening, you can get that on our website, getreba.com. Just go to the resource center. And a lot of what you said resonated with me on that. We're pretty cynical about predictive AI for this industry. If you caught me 7-8 years ago, I would have been extremely bullish on it. And then I got involved in a couple projects and learned like how much data you really need to do good predictive analytics. And we don't have terabytes and petabytes of data. So a lot of times classical modeling works quite well. I do think on the generative side, it's really interesting. There's a lot of sort of bar tricks or parlor tricks that are cute but uninteresting. And at the same time, I think of applications like you're talking about where it's mostly administrative work and you can constrain the AI. Like one of the things I worry about generative AI is hallucinations. I've actually experienced that using ChatGPT on a couple things. But in the chatbot world and like I would think on a focused solution, like just trying to take the normal people communication side out of debt collection, a lot could be done where it's not going to hallucinate because the sandbox is small enough. And then to your point, it can escalate to a person at the right time as long as you teach it where the escalation points are, where it may even be, quasi rules based as opposed to pure machine learning. Curious, does that resonate with you, or that's sort of how I feel about your world?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I agree on the sandbox idea, and we've also been a little careful because there's obviously a lot of amazing tools available, but we've been careful in the testing to make sure there aren't those hallucinations that get too far outside the boundaries. You have to have those guardrails in place, particularly when you're talking about a highly compliant, highly regulated.
I was just about to go there.
space.
Yeah, like if an acquisitions person is building a comp set and they get a hallucinated community, no blood, no foul. In your world, right, you could end up, in front of state boards and other really nasty places you don't want to be.
Exactly. Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay, well, let's get out of that. Let's get out of that sort of little spiral down what can go wrong with AI. Switch gears, something a little more personal in nature. I read off your bio, your CV, but maybe tell a little bit about your origin story in industry. Like exactly how did you get involved in multifamily? I mean, you and I, God, we must have met 20 years ago, I want to say, maybe even a little more. I can't remember. So
that's probably about right.
Yeah. So share with everyone how you ended up in multifamily.
I mean, you'd mentioned one of the companies in my background, Factual Data. I was in Colorado with a company called Factual Data, and we were reselling credit information. And one of my clients at the time was a little startup called Safe Rent out of Denver that was really the first company to convince apartment operators to make score-based leasing decisions.
Yep.
And I got very interested in what they were doing and talked myself into a position there. And then that business was sold to a much larger database company. It's gone through a lot of name changes: First American, First Advantage, CoreLogic. It was all one entity. And there I headed up the sales team as well as some of the account management team, and then helped them launch a renters insurance program, one of the first real sort of focused renters insurance programs for multifamily housing. And took a little break from the industry, worked for a consulting business for a bit, and then got back in with Onsite and led their sales team. And Onsite, I guess for those that don't know, was a company that was a screening company as well as really focused on online leasing. So the whole move-in process, modernizing the leasing process and moving it online. And then eventually that business was sold to RealPage. And I had always wanted to start my own company. And there's a little tight group of us from Onsite that were collaborating on these ideas. And I really didn't have I had the general idea that the move out process and the collection process was messy, but I wasn't dead set on starting that business. But I started to talk to clients and just ask them what part of the resident life cycle had not been sufficiently addressed with technology. And it was just interesting because so much focus again is on resident acquisition, dealing with current residents. But there really weren't a lot of great tools and processes to help assist with the move out process to make that the final accounting as clean as possible, the communication as positive as possible, not lose track of things, still see where the money is. And there just wasn't anything really there. And in a lot of ways, it created brand risk at move out. If there's not really good communication, the leasing staff is more incentivized to deal with current residents and new residents. And so the whole thing was a bit of an afterthought. And I just decided to bootstrap it completely on my own. Hired a developer, had a couple of clients that were great partners, and built basically it started as a CRM for their accounts receivable team.
Okay.
And then it just grew from there. So the layers that eventually got built in were to become a move out portal for the residents, to run the payments through one platform so all the reporting and financials could be in one place, and create as positive an experience as possible quickly after move out. The most important time to try to clean things up is as quickly as possible. And traditionally, this would sit on a leasing agent's desk and maybe something would happen, and then eventually it would go to a collection agency and they're getting calls, without a lot of communication in between. So we were able to fill that gap with technology, and then also partner with staffing partners that help with the outreach and communication. And then eventually we ended up with a marketplace of collection agencies that high performing agencies that are excited to show their work. And be a part of a marketplace where reporting is pure because all the payments are going through one place. And then it's just grown from there. So that was I guess it was about roughly 7 years ago, but we've been really fortunate to grow organically. And I laugh. I say that we solve the least profitable, most complicated part of the whole payment flow. But it's ended up working out well.
No, as I say, the unsexy parts often don't attract as much attention, so they're a real opportunity. I'm glad someone's out there working on that problem. So when you think about your whole career, certainly many people have influenced you. Who's your most influential professional mentor?
I've definitely had several over the years. My direct leader that I worked with for a long time was Monty Jones.
Yeah. I was gonna say you were
with,
crazy enough to go work for him a second time after you already knew him, so that was on you.
Yeah, we worked together at a couple different places, which is great. There's several. Jane Carrington from Onsite, from a product sort of strategy standpoint, has been a great mentor for me as well. I've got a good friend, Chad Scott, who started ePremium and has helped me a lot on the business side of things, understand how the investment side of things, the back end of the business works. Because I just came from operations, so I had to learn how to navigate, the back end of running a business and how investments are structured and that sort of thing. So Mark Stringer from Avenue 5 has been a great mentor as far as the actual product development and been very helpful. And there's been a whole bunch of folks.
Excellent. Yeah, I know Monty well, obviously, especially from the Safe Rent days. He's one of my favorite guys in the industry. Thinking a little bit about current business and where you are in that journey, what's maybe the biggest challenge you're facing, and how are you working to overcome that?
I think, well, the biggest challenge that we have, and I'm going to jump back a little bit to the earlier part of the conversation, but I think the
Hmm.
biggest challenge we have is whenever there's an upheaval in technology or a leap forward in the tools that you have available to yourself,
Hmm.
how do you incorporate those into an existing tech stack and structure? Sometimes it's easier to start from scratch, right? But
Right. Oh yeah.
when you've started to actually build something, you have to be nimble enough to adjust to incorporating all this new stuff, but still you know, keep the whole foundation in place. And I think we're doing that really well. We've brought a lot of good folks on this year and really built the foundation of the business in the back end to do that. But that's, I think that's part of the challenge is,
Yeah.
the best way to incorporate the new stuff without breaking the old stuff, to
Yeah. No, that makes
use
sense.
technical terminology.
There you go. So what's maybe one thing about the industry that Lynn today, right, 2023 Lynn, knows that maybe Lynn back from Factual Data didn't know, and in hindsight wish 2023 Lynn could go back and teach him that way back when.
Oh, that's a good. What I know today that I didn't know then.
Hmm.
I think if I were looking at starting a business, the thing I've learned is like, you can have the greatest idea, the coolest gadget, but the deep thinking to really connect it to the real world,
Hmm.
and how it gets pulled through. So, when you think about, it's like it's the old terminology with the internet where they say the final mile is the hardest part.
Right.
They could get the big fiber optic lines run, but to get it to your actual bedroom is the hardest part. That has always been the case with, I think, multifamily housing as well.
Hmm.
It's getting to the actual leasing
Yeah.
office, to the interaction with the resident, and it probably took me a while to understand how critical that is. But if your technology solution can help
Yeah.
really solve that final
Yeah.
mile, then you become incredibly sticky.
Yeah.
Um, that's where you're not as
So
easily replaced.
yeah. So what is that metaphorical final mile for PayReady in terms of your go-to-market? Like, you've been involved in sales and go-to-market in this industry for longer than 95% of the salespeople I know, right? All the way back to the late 90s or early aughts, back in those safe rent days. Um, I think you could teach a lot of people, like, just using PayReady as example today, what's the thing that's hardest, the biggest barrier to getting an operator to choose to work with you, and how do you guys overcome that?
Well, the way that we overcame it is the
Hmm.
way we structured everything from the beginning was literally to require as little involvement as possible from site level staff.
Hmm.
That was a core tenet from the very beginning. It's like whatever
Yep.
we build, let's not add to the staff, but take away.
Yeah.
And particularly, it's a little bit easier when you're in our world because it's something they don't want to do anyway.
Right.
Um, so the way we've structured everything is like we're one of the few things that doesn't require a login and a password management for site staff. I mean,
Mhm.
down to that level of granularity, right? So if you're gonna, when we come in and replace existing processes, there's setup with the integrations and all that sort of thing. And there's once in a while there's some interaction that has to happen with the site staff, but it's completely automated with links through email and that sort of thing. But we're not requiring active interaction with the software.
Got
So
it.
from a training and onboarding implementation standpoint, we've made it a bit of a no-brainer. Because what you'll run into is, in from my experience, most operators, one of the biggest hangups is change management.
Yep.
They have turnover, they
Yep.
have staff, they only have so many systems they want to deal with. You have to make
Yep.
sure whatever you create, you're thinking about things like single sign-on and integrating with their current processes and making it look and feel as much as possible like their current day-to-day thing.
Yep.
Um, so we focused a lot on just whatever we build, make it
Mhm.
not a requirement for the staff to
Yeah.
directly interact with it a lot. And so
No, that's pretty brilliant.
the on the the onboarding piece is the change management's always the tough one.
Yep. So switching gears from the soft side to maybe the harder side. Again, I mean, you've been involved in credit screening, right? One of the more data analytical applications in the business. Obviously, my bread and butter in the early years in this industry was pricing revenue management. Maybe the only application more analytical than credit screening. So you and I both share that sort of just, I don't know, we've just been swimming in the data world for so long. One of the things that I've noticed though is like when I talk about data-driven decision making, that means something very specific to me as a former data analyst, a former project manager, right, long before I became CEO of a tech company. But I find, lots of different stakeholders in this industry attach very different meanings when they're talking about data decision or data-driven decision making. So I was really curious with your background, when I say data-driven decision making, what does that mean to you?
Well, a little more granular in our space, where those two things meet are they're really looking to us to be able to analyze a specific file or account or resident record and decide what to do with it, right, based on history. So depending on the balance size, depending on resident information that we gather, demographic information, does this account require a softer touch for a longer period of time? Are they going to react better to what type of messaging that's put out to them? Does it need to be routed through a legal process because history tells us with these different characteristics that's probably the best route for this account to be taken into? And so if you go back to say SafeRent in the early days of applicant screening, the whole thing was, hey, let's trust us to just make the decision for you, right? We're going to take this whole thing off your hands. We'll just make the call. And so really I applied that same logic to the recovery process.
Yeah, that's actually a perfect segue to a question that was bouncing around my head, which is, you're taking a lot off their hands, yet this is a business where people, historically they like to have control. Like I'm gonna, if I strike out, I'm gonna strike out swinging, right? I'm gonna sink or swim on my own. And so letting go of something, even something they don't want to do, but by letting go, they have to trust an algorithm or something else. That can sometimes be a challenge. How have you gotten people to trust the algorithms as opposed to try to hoard all the decision making themselves?
Yeah, well, for starters, it is a thing that in some cases they like to control it. Other cases they realize they didn't really have control over it because there was no tool or system and to enable control, right? Yeah. So there was no visibility from the executive level to even know what was happening at the site level post move out, or very little. And then in terms of the actual control over the process, what we find is, and it varies from client to client. Some clients are very performance focused, so they're wanting to make sure that the recovery is as high as possible. We have some clients that are way more brand risk focused that just want to make sure they have the nicest exit possible with the resident and everything in between. So the way that we build trust with all those things is it started with just working really closely with our clients, and then we started to build a track record of history and results that we can prove out and share. And then testimonials. We've been really fortunate that, thank goodness, we've got almost complete client retention. And most of that, some of that's tied to the outcomes, the financial outcomes. Some of it's tied to the fact that the leasing staff has got a lot more time on their hands to do other things. And a big part of it's been tied to there's been no brand damage. In fact, brand reputation scores have gone up when they've utilized our service. So
are you still bootstrapped or do you have investors?
We have some private investment, but still majority controlled, which is kind of unique in our industry.
It's hard to hold on to a tech company. The dilution rounds, reduce the control pretty quickly. And one more question before we get to the just fun part at the end. Again, you've like me, you've been around more than 2 decades. So a lot's changed in the industry. What are one or two things that you would point to as maybe the most fundamental changes that have occurred over those 20 plus years?
I would say, at least in my opinion, when I first started, the industry was considered way behind on technology, way behind all other industries.
Mhm.
Um, I have seen over that time a lot more um, highly educated people coming into the space on both sides, both the provider side as well as the operator side,
Mhm.
um, and a lot more progressive people in terms of adopting technologies and experimenting with things. So I think there's a little bit of a reputation, in my opinion, historically, that the industry is way behind, like a dinosaur.
Yeah.
Um, in some ways now, like you mentioned, NMHC, there's a lot of kind of future promise talk about all this technology that's coming out. It
Yeah.
almost feels like the pendulum's gone the other way, where there's a lot of experimentation happening. There's a lot of attention being paid. I think everyone knows that the rental industry, the prop tech's a buzzword in the finance space and investment space. Prop tech, insure tech,
Yeah.
everyone's everyone's got to have a place to live. Home ownership's getting harder. There's going to be more and more rentals, so there's a lot of attention being paid to it, and I think that's pushing technology into the space. So it's almost like, if it almost feels like it's pushed the other way, where
Yeah.
you almost have to rein back the technology back into reality.
Yeah. No, that's an interesting perspective. I hadn't thought about it, but come to think of it, I got my first OpTech, or the predecessor of OpTech, at NMHC. God, my first one was probably like 2002 or 2003, something like that. And then here in 2023, there must have been a dozen PE or VC companies there who were looking to meet vendors, right? Like
Yeah.
it's always it's the vendor to operator ratio, et cetera, right? And all the vendors want that ratio to be as low as possible. And all of a sudden, here's this group of PE and VC vendor or VC providers and investment banks as well, advisory banks. They all love that there were a ton of vendors there. I personally had at least 4 meetings between a combination of potential advisory services on future deals and or the VC or PE directly, and I'm sure there was a half a dozen there that I didn't even have time or exposure to meet with. That's really quite a change.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I had the same experience. Like the month or two leading up to it, it was an
Yeah,
onslaught of,
yeah.
yeah.
Usually, when I first became a vendor, I just stopped getting emails, except from dumb vendors who didn't call their list and were trying to sell me stuff. And now
Yeah.
you actually, guys like you and me are actually getting emails from the VC
Mm.
and PE, and the banks want to meet with us. That is a big change. Hey, so now that we've done the heavy lifting, we always like to end these interviews with a little kind of fun, rapid fire James Lipton style Q&A, if you remember the
Yeah,
original
yeah.
Inside the Actors Studio. So as I say every time, just one rule: don't think too hard. Okay. So question 1: what book has influenced you the most?
Most recently, Reframe Your Brain by Scott Adams. I just
Cool.
I just I just read it, and been
Is
deploying
Scott
some of the ideas.
is Scott Adams the same guy who did Dilbert, or am I remembering the name wrong? Or it's just
Hmm.
two Scott. It's the same. It's the same
Yeah,
Scott Adams. Oh,
same
I
guy.
gotta get that.
Yeah,
I gotta get that book then.
yeah.
Cool. What's your favorite time of day?
Morning, early morning.
Yep. What is your favorite app?
Oh, X. I probably spend the most time on X.
Yes, formerly known as Twitter.
Uh-huh.
Uh, what's your biggest pet peeve?
Allowed eating.
What's your spirit animal?
Snow leopard.
Snow leopard. That's pretty precise. You got to tell me. You got to give me at least one sentence on that.
I, you know what it was? It was I was in New Orleans, and a psychic pulled me off of the side of the street and told me that I was a snow leopard. So I just
There you go.
took it.
Stuck with you. I like that.
Yeah, she claimed it for me.
There
I
you
just thought
go.
it was fun. So
That was not the sentence I expected. If you had to pick one food to eat forever, what would you eat?
macaroni and cheese.
And what is your go-to for having a good laugh?
Mm. Um, the movie Step Brothers.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing your insights with us today, Lynn. Where can everybody find out anything more about you or PayReady, particularly online?
payready.com. A lot of information on LinkedIn as well. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, thanks again for being with us.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.